Hello and welcome once again to Baked Beans Garage, where it's another slow diesel. How refreshing. Let's get into it. Now, if you've been here a while, you've been introduced briefly to my beloved 1982 Volkswagen Rabbit Pickup truck. Today we'll have a much closer look and do a whole bunch of work. Now, I haven't driven it regularly in about a year, mostly because of the tires, but we'll talk about a bunch of details later. First, let's get it over to the shop where there are things like lighting and space and whatnot. I have no glow plugs. Cool. Well, this will hardly be the first time I have to start it with brute force. Now, if you're familiar with these rigs, you already have a lot of questions. We'll get to it. Don't look too hard. But I'm going to go ahead and assume it's my cheap manual glow plug solenoid that has died. It left an alarming amount of fluid on the floor in there, so I don't want to run it too long. But I actually am going to do the thing I always forget and give it a bath first. Now, to answer a few questions, no, it's not the original engine, but for all intents and purposes, it is stock. The original one was all full of rust. I rebuilt this one about 5 years ago because my lease at the time didn't explicitly prohibit it. As you can see, it's just a stock 1.6 diesel, rated from the factory at a blistering 48 horsepower. This one's just yellow, and it has a Corrado cam cover and an intake from a gasser. This long spaghetti intake with a dirt bike air filter isn't the prettiest, but it does work. I figured the coldest air is on that side. The only real modifications are the alternator and the oil cooler. That alternator is from a 96-ish Gulf. That's just what I had at the time. And the oil cooler is just some generic unit. I didn't like how hot the oil was getting on the highway, so I did that. And then the catch can. It used to be mounted back there, but it broke off and I zip tied it here, and that kind of became permanent. We'll undo that today. And I did expect to lose some paint doing that, but that's probably just my subpar prep work from back then. Anyways, the list is quite long. I'm not sure where I want to start yet, so let's just pick it up and look underneath. But luckily this is not a rust belt rig, so I can pretty confidently use the factory lift points. And I immediately notice the smell of gear oil under here. Looks like we're losing some just from the cap on the end of the transmission. Hopefully that doesn't turn into a big deal. Slightly further back, we'll see the main thing I want to address today, the steering rack. There's nothing catastrophically wrong with it, but both boots are torn, and they probably have been for a while. There's a little bit of play up and down on this side, and just in the wheel, there is also some slop. So that, I just have a new rack. Hopefully it actually fits. I have heard some horror stories. Slightly further outboard, the control arm bushings. They haven't completely fallen apart, but I've wanted to do new ones for quite a while now. As for the rest of the wear components in the front end, it's pretty much all new. When I first put it together, I did ball joints, wheel bearings, brakes, struts, strut mounts, both tie rod ends, and pretty much everything except for the things I just mentioned. I also didn't do CV axles. Here we can see one completely torn boot and 3 that aren't too far behind it. That's another thing on the list. Moving back, I may have lied. There are some rust issues very close to those jack points. I don't remember those being nearly that bad. I'm not sure why I didn't address it earlier, but We'll do something about that today. Further back still, we'll see that the entire floor is still made of floor. Of course, I've been under here before, but I had to do a few little patches. Nice to see they're still made of metal. Also still made of metal is the original exhaust, although all the hangers have now fallen off again. That was already on the list. And then the shifter, it still looks pretty fresh and new and still works pretty fresh and new. I'm sure I'll find something wrong with it to deal with. And all the way aftways, we'll see our Conestoga wagon spec suspension. There's nothing wrong with this end, so I don't plan on doing anything back here. You may notice the air shocks, the thing that Volkswagen explicitly says don't do. I don't need to explain myself. Also the zip tie exhaust hangers. I did that just so the exhaust wasn't rattling around when it got shipped up here when I moved. But I will say that the air shocks look a little flat. But while we're back here, since we're friends, right, I think I can explain my thought process behind the air shocks. Now when I got this rig, it had been hit right about here, and this whole corner was kind of crunched in. So I sectioned out and welded in a piece from another bedside. But because of that incident, the entire bedside is a bit warped, and this wheel arch sits a little bit too far in the rear, and that was catching on the tire when I had pretty much anything in the bed. So the air shocks are just to maintain the ride height while I'm carrying some stuff. Now, of course, the longer you look at it, the wonkier it looks, so just don't do that. Not that I have the skill, but I do not think it is worth ruining the patina to try to straighten that out, so it's just going to stay like this. It's perfectly serviceable and almost presentable. And you may notice how I have already perfectly matched this replacement taillight bezel to the patina. Speaking of taillight and adding to the wonk factor, there's two left-hand taillights on this thing. This was an abandoned project by a previous owner. He already bought these. I didn't notice till like a year later that they're two of the same taillights, but now you know that they fit on both sides. It just looks a bit silly. Also, while we're here, I think I'll put some air in the shocks. Maybe see if I can find a leak. And to conclude back here, the tailgate, it's also not original to this rig, but the patina does match quite nicely. When I put this together, I painted in the lettering with some Tamiya modeling paint in hopes that it would weather in the sun and look like this. I'm pleased that that has done exactly what I wanted it to. Anyways, suppose we'll put it back on the ground and finish the tour, then go over what I want to get done. In here, there's barely room for me, so you get to stay out there. Of course, there's not much to see in here because there's not much in here. But we do have my lovely custom headliner. Matched to it is this beautiful shifter boot, atop of which is a Kame golf ball shifter, very classy. Once you're done telling me I pronounced Kame wrong, you can look at my oil pressure gauge that reads in pounds. Right next to it is the oil temp gauge that reads in Celsius. Further up, we have an odometer that has read 201,000 miles since I've owned it. I keep forgetting to get a speedo cable, but I have finally done that. Maybe it'll work today. In front of me, there is a 4-button steering wheel from a Cabrio because I like it. Behind that, there is a dash that only has 2 big cracks in it. Very nice. And then the standard fare Pioneer head unit because I want Bluetooth. And finally down there, there is a relatively fresh carpet that I never finished trimming. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Pappy Cap. This is an original Gem Top GT built right here in the US. Here you can see there was a bit of an incident. This window was taken from us by the mighty HT20 and its unstoppable mower deck. We'll address that if there's time. And back here, under the hatch struts that still work, there is a bunch of stuff that I need to install. Said parts are such and as follows. To address the torn CV boots, we have some CV boots, conveniently already installed on some new axles. I was going to get boots, but I really hate doing that. It's not a lot of fun, and this was only like $40 more than just buying boots. In front of those is a speedo cable and some gears. One of those ought to work. Suppose we'll see. Here is some stuff to do a timing belt and an oil change. That'll be getting its own video, but we'll skim through it in this one too. Over here is some suspension stuff, some new control arms with the bushings already in them. That saves a step. And then to correct the steering slop, we have a new rack, some tie rods, some boots, and some bushings. And finally, to hopefully address the leaky transmission, we have a new cap to seal in there. Then some exhaust hangers, a headlight switch, maybe we'll get to that. And of course, I don't need to tell you that those tires are completely shot, so here we have some new circles. I always get a kick out of looking at the fun brand names that cheap tires have. In this case, we'll be going from the O2s to the full ways. But speaking of cheap, back to the CV axles. Of course, OEM just doesn't exist anymore. These are cheap aftermarkets. The main concern is that the hardening and the quality of the materials in these CV joints is just nowhere near as good as you would get from OEM. Of course, that means they won't last as long and they won't hold as much power, but I think it'll be fine. For the rest of it, I'm not looking forward to whatever aftermarket part-induced headaches we will come across, but suppose we'll find out. Let's get into it. And with a preliminary list made up, I think I will begin by evaluating these rust holes. Those always seem to be the most unpredictable. But once I have a plan, we will move on to the steering rack and the front suspension. So we'll begin by removing my lovely set of polished teardrops. They could use a touch-up on the polish. They're not all that rare, but what is rare is my full set of center caps. We'll have a look at the brakes too. I don't think they need any attention. They're not all that old. And those brakes have just been sitting a while. They're a bit crusty, but there's lots of meat left. Also, as you can see, a surprise to no one, we're on Racelands up front. It's lowered about 3 inches all around. These in the front and drop plates in the rear. And this here captain side is certainly the worst of the two, so we'll start here. I'm going to try to do this without taking the fender off, because like a Mark II, they are bolted and then glued on, and that factory undercoating is not fun. And I had to weld up some pinholes on the bottom, and it got a bit ugly, so just don't look at that. And after some cardboard aided design, I have pieces to weld in, so I guess I'll do that. Well, it got a little ugly up in there too, but we won't have to look at that as long as this pinch weld is nice and sealed up. I am happy, which it now is. See, it's not too bad if you only look at it right there. And that's as nice as it needs to be, so I think I'll call it there for my own sanity. I guess there is another side to do, though. And with those looking pretty serviceable, we can move swiftly along to the steering rack. And I haven't done one of these before, but once I get this transmission mount and the shifter out of the way, it should just come off its mounts and slide out that way. I don't know if Santa is a subscriber, but hey, how about a transmission jack? And of course, there's this rubber boot, which is always a delight to deal with. Well, it doesn't work like that at all. And after a clean of moderate effort, the new rack can go in. I had left the tie rods off of it because I figured I'd learned something taking the old one out. Now, I can confidently say this is the teeniest little steering rack I ever did see. Quite the cutie. Really hope I don't learn something else right now. And with a whiff of thread ketchup, we can introduce some tie rods. I already put the boots on because that's no fun to do or watch. I also made them vaguely the same length. And of course they have flats for a wrench, but pipe wrench better. Well, I do still have to get the wrench on there. And not to be forgotten, a little dab of grease where the boot meets the tie rod. If you forget that, you go to adjust it, and the boot wants to spin with the tie rod, and then you have to swear at it a bunch. And this one just has a generic universal boot on it. Don't quite remember why, but I'm sure past me had a good reason to get that. Seems like it'll work. And I guess this should go back first, just so my other mounts don't get mad at me. Now it would be time to connect those to the wheels and do some aligning, but they would have to come back off anyways to put the axles in. So I'm going to take a break from the steering and do that. And while I'm in there, may as well do the control arm too. Way too easy. Something's going to happen. But whatever jackass put this together did mix some hex and triple square bolts. Glad I noticed that. And I'm even going to try to use the gasket that no one ever does. But if it's hard, I'm just going to give up. Worth mentioning, these ball joints are riveted in from the factory. To put new ones in, you gotta bolt them in. And now we can finally attach this. And once again, just one more side to do. And I'm still waiting on some parts for the shifters, so that'll have to wait. But with all the shiny new bits installed, a bit of a retrospective, most of that was pointless. These ball joints and tie rods were fine. No matter. Now we can lower it most of the way down and give it the closest thing it's gonna get to an alignment. And after setting the rig on its own suspension and tightening everything up, we can go ahead and make sure the rack is centered by just counting the turns of the steering wheel. And with that wheel in the centered position, we can go ahead and do some aligning. Here you will see my very sophisticated setup. The first step, of course, was making sure the pinch welds are nice and straight, as with any alignment. I have already done that with a mallet. Here you will see I have one board that I know to be straight right up against the pinch weld, and then another board that I also know to be straight up against the wheel. And with the outer board squared up to the wheel, not the tire, we can just measure it at the front of the inner board and the rear, compare the measurements, and once they're the same, we know the wheels are pointed in the same direction. And I could do some trigonometry or some math, calculate that triangle and show how 1 degree is going to make like a 2 centimeter difference at the back. But I don't feel like doing that. It'd probably be wrong anyways. This will certainly get it close enough to at least take it to a shop and get it aligned properly. Of course, I'm not going to do that, but again, I don't recommend this. This is just how I do it. Anyways, that's the whole front end sorted, probably. So we can go ahead and cross a bunch of things off the list. Now the thing second in line that I was dreading the most is the timing belt, so let's do that next. This catch can needs addressed anyways, so we'll get it out of the way. And I might make the intake less janky later, we'll see. And I will pause now because I'm going to make a separate video for anyone that actually wants to learn how to do this. So go watch that if you're interested, but for now I'll just skim over it for the sake of time. Ah. Good. Well, that was easy. And I decided not to paint the cam cover because I kind of like how it matches the patina or whatever excuse I want to use for laziness. But I did do something about the catch can. I just drilled and tapped some holes in it and redid the bracket. Not sure why I thought that would work 5 years ago, but this ought to be a little beefier. And I can't take credit for that intake adapter, just don't look at it. And these hoses snake around the intake, so we'll have to put that back too. And I have not yet found the motivation to change this, so I think I'm just going to knot. And that's one more thing to cross off the list, except it's not on the list, but it still counts as progress if I add it just to cross it off immediately. Anyways, before I go taking more things apart, I have the parts for the shifter, so let's get that back together. And all these bushings are fine. I figured I'd just reset the clock since it's taken apart for the rack. But for some reason last time I never replaced the little relay ball thingy, so I have a new one. The only bushing I didn't replace is this guy in the middle, the one that always wears out and makes for all kinds of slop in the shifter. That is the Delrin unit from Mk1 Engineering. A bit pricey and super tedious to change, but it does work quite well. And we're just going to ignore this torn section of boot that's supposed to be back there by the shifter ball. We'll find out how that works when I drive it later, but for now I'm already looking at the transmission, so let's deal with this leak. These 5-speeds have a little stamped cap on the end that covers the 5th gear housing. Looks like my sealant has just had it. What? Now I expected at least a little bit of water from that rather exuberant pressure washing earlier, but that is a bit concerning. But I don't really have anything better to do than just move on. What is that? I would like to add, this is all news to me. I did not expect such a catastrophic milkshake. So I guess I'll just open up all the holes I can find and spray a bunch of brake clean in it. That usually works. I just had a flashback to, again, doing this last time. I was doing exactly this, and the straw from the can launched into the transmission. I did get it back, but that was a couple hours I lost. I'm going to try to flush it out through the hole in the top. You think it's a bad idea to use some 10-year-old 20% nitro fuel? No? All right. Well, it's on you if it goes wrong. I have actually been saving this for such a situation. It's too old, there's no way it'll run in an RC car anymore, but it is 2-stroke fuel, so it does have oil in it. And I do think the spiciness of the nitro will help break down whatever old gunk oil and water is in there. And down there next to the reverse switch that never works is where the speedo cable goes in. But I am guessing it was only leaking from here on account of being way over full because of the water. Hopefully that won't be an issue going forward, but I'm going to have to at least guess at where the water came from. Well, I suppose the camera is going to be in the way. So a few months ago when this thing was parked up, I realized one day that all of my coolant had gone away. I didn't see it on the ground, so I was a bit confused. And when I went to pull it out for this project, I figured that coolant is in the past. However, you just watched me realize that it was no longer in the past, but very much still in the present, in the transmission. Now you may wonder how that coolant got from the coolant jug to the transmission, and so did I for quite a while, but I will save you the couple hours of reckoning and head scratching I went through. After a while, I realized that the coolant jug kind of just started leaking out of nowhere, and it was dripping down the hose that goes to the crossover pipe, but at some point, that touches the speedo cable. So the speedo cable was picking up that stream of coolant and running it right down to the base of the cable where there's a nice big hole in the sheathing. So over a couple months, it kind of just drained all of the coolant into the transmission. So that's pretty neat. But at least it is coolant and not just water, so it didn't fill the transmission with rust. But after finding the milkshake and the green, I stuck my heat gun under there and helped it along with the torch just to bake all of the water out of the transmission, and that seems to have worked quite well. I stuck the borescope in there is no more goop to be found, and for good measure, I flushed it a few more times with some extra jungle juice oil I found. So now it should just be a matter of putting all the plugs back in the transmission and filling it with some actual gear oil and not glycol. I don't want to drain this drain pan twice, so I'll also grab this before I lower it. Now the last hole that needs plugged up in the transmission is the speedo cable. These transmissions have 3 different flavors of speedo pinion you can choose from. There's the red 15, the white 16, and the weirdo green 17 tooth. But from Googling and whatnot, I think it is the white one I want. Not like these Speedos are very accurate to begin with, but at least it'll point at something, probably. And we'll plug that into the cluster later when we get into the interior. But for now, let's just get some sauce into the transmission. Just going to use some cheap gear oil, because I do want to change this again quite soon, what with the coolant debacle. And we just go till it comes out the fill hole on the side. Now I do know that later versions of this transmission, they moved that plug up a little bit. So I think I'll put the plug in and then just give it a little more. And I guess I don't know if those leaks will stay sorted, but we can cross them off the list. Anyways, to finish up under the hood, the next thing is the glow relay. As I mentioned, that is a starter solenoid from some motorbike. I still hear it clicking. It tries to work, but there's still no continuity between those two posts. So I guess I'll just change it out then. I'll get my electron cube out of the way if you promise not to look at my battery tray. My terminals could use some new terminals too. Suppose I'll do that also in as well. And that'll be the third one of those little solenoids I have gone through, so here is something different and hopefully better. Just a generic 100 amp relay. And with any luck that works now. If you were here when I lobotomized the glow plug circuit in the wagon, this works the same way. That light is no longer a wait to start, it just tells you they're on, but it seems to work. And it's about time to move to the interior anyways, but first, some obligatory wire tidying. I also finally did something about the dirt bike air filter. It was just a bit too goofy. This is just some cheap pod filter. It still looks pretty goofy. I decided just to embrace it, so I didn't even paint that little elbow there. But while I was doing that, I somehow managed to work up the motivation to do some other things I have been procrastinating on for 2-ish years. First, the rearview mirror has fallen off 4 times now since I've owned it. Each time I glued it on, I used proper rearview mirror adhesive, and each time it failed. So this time, based on the fact that the spoiler has still not fallen off my GTI, I used some Sikaflex P2G. And it's at least staying up there in the meantime. I suppose we'll see. And that little black spot looks a little better anyways. As you can see, I scuffed the windshield at one point to try to get more adhesion. That didn't work. Also, the window and the cap, of course these were tempered glass, but getting custom cut tempered glass is a bit expensive. I happen to have some polycarbonate, so I just took the plug out, gnawed that out. I'm sure a cutoff wheel is the proper way to cut this stuff. And that looks fairly decent. I was worried it was going to be hazy or a different color or too wavy and look terribly different from the other windows, but that's actually pretty close. I'm sure it'll fade in the sun over time, but we'll see. That's a problem for later. Anyways, finally, to the interior. I want to pull the cluster out anyways to clean it up a little bit, but I suppose we'll plug in that speedo cable while we're in there. And here we can also see what I had to do to make that glow plug light work. Those lights use a switched ground from the factory. I just had to hijack the circuit to use a switched power. Now I just want to polish up this lens so I can see a little better, but my main goal is to get rid of the dead spider that's been poking over my fuel gauge for ever. And the bottom of this lens is pretty heavily scuffed. Hoping I can bring it back around with some cutting polish. I think I'm going to call that pretty good. Now to get this back together, I have verified that the speedo does work. But in trying to get the odometer to work, all I've really done is kind of soiled the finish on the Speedo. Since this thing was in a flood at some point, there's just a bunch of rust in there, and in turn, broken gears. So I think I'm just going to cut my losses, be happy with only a Speedo, and put it back together. I also think it's nifty that we have a bunch of LED indicators here, except for the high beam indicator, because that's blue. It's just an incandescent bulb and a little blue filter. They did it like that because Volkswagen had a hard time getting blue LEDs on account of them not existing yet. I'm going to need that. And even with the Speedo looking a bit sad now, that is quite the improvement. Now we can evict the old Speedo cable. And the dimmer doesn't work in this headlight switch, so I have a new one that hopefully does. Now for the part where I probably have to relearn, I have to unplug the cable from the transmission to get it to fit. But again, I'll just pretend I'm confident. Oh, there's plenty of room. As long as nothing else has gone wrong since last time I messed with this, there should be cluster lights now. Nope, that's nice. Well, the dimmer's working now, but I still have no cluster lights. That might just be a problem for later. Anyways, in the meantime, the list is getting short. Suppose I'll put on some exhaust hangers. Well, that was the end of the list, so I guess we're done until I drive it. I do, however, feel like I have forgotten a detail. I did want to flush out the coolant because it was rather brown last time I changed it. So I guess I'll drop a little flusher outer into that bottle and then we'll go for a ride and see how it feels. So without any further ado, I guess we'll go evaluate my alignment. I paid someone to mount the tires. I really didn't want to deal with it. I did ask them to clean up the beads and leak check them when they were done. And to their credit, the beads weren't leaking, but 2 of the valve stems were. At least I got to break those nice new beads to change some valve stems. But after that, I gave the wheels a very well-deserved polish, and they're looking quite spiffy again. Oh, the Speedo. I completely forgot about that. It's nice to see that needle move for the first time. It's not very well illuminated, but the needle is needling. I like that. You may notice it's quite loud. I'm sure this audio is going to be clipped all to hell, but I'll do my best to touch it up. I'm still waiting to find a straight enough piece of road to evaluate the alignment. But, I'm driving straight. I almost forgot I completely went through the front end because it feels fine. If anything, the steering actually feels a little lighter. Don't know how that worked out, but I like it. What else can I see if it works? Nice. Oh yeah, the horns are up inside the bumper. Cheeky little detail. Well, the HVAC foam ejector still works only on high. I know I've needed a resistor for a long time now. I might actually address that. Some defrogging would be nice right now. Oh, but I don't have that. If you were here for the GTI build, this HVAC box is also lobotomized. So the air kind of just comes out mostly everywhere, biased towards the windshield. Ooh. Yeah, the steering is definitely lighter. I wonder how bad that rack actually was. And I will admit to having fiddled with the scumbag screw on this one. It does roll coal quite nicely because I'm a degenerate. Of course, very unclassy, but it's a nice defense mechanism for such a tiny vehicle, especially in North America. But that's everything working as intended and going quite swimmingly. I suppose I'll just keep driving for a while and keep pretending I don't know the registration's expired. And with the color of that juice, I'm inclined to believe it did something. I don't know, I feel better about it. But that's why you only use distilled water in your coolant. You never know what kind of minerals and dinosaurs are in your tap water. And there might be some in there that will turn into rust. But while I was under there, I also found the oil leak I had forgotten about. Looks like my oil cooler lines just got tired. But I had wanted to rework the jankiness of that chafing protection anyway, so I just made some new lines with an appropriate elbow so it just dodges the alternator altogether. I am rather happy with that. So coolant flush, oil cooler lines, continuing in that order, I'll repack the rear wheel bearings. At some point I noticed it was red, which I know is cheap grease. I have better grease now. I also found one of them was completely roasted. Don't know how that happened. Doesn't matter. Fresh bearings, fresh grease now. And we should be ready for another test drive, but first I have decided I want to do something about those cluster lights. And just looking at the flex circuit, I can deduce which contacts it should be, and that's working fine. Question mark. And I will never learn that it's always just crusty bulb holders. And finally, some working cluster lights. Beautiful. Speedo cable is always the best part. Well, I guess I'll just put it back together until 5 minutes later when it comes apart again. And I'm only now remembering that the blower motor still doesn't work. Guess I'll look at that now. Well, as it turns out, I don't have a dead blower resistor, I just have no blower resistor. So that might be a problem for later. It is not a problem for right now. So after that, there's not really anything left to test drive it for, but I have put another 100 or so miles on it. It is still adequately slow, it still drives straight, and the mirror has stayed attached, so I'm quite happy. But that is the end of the list, so I suppose it's the end of the video too. But if you've stuck around, I do appreciate you watching, especially this time. You may notice we have recently hit 10,000 subscribers, very illustrious. Although YouTube does not send you a plaque for 10K, so I have made my own. Very fancy. And if you really enjoy my voice and my face, you can head over to Patreon for some random sporadic behind the beans content. Thank you to my current Patreon supporters. I love you. Also, buy a shirt, maybe some stickers soon. Anyways, this has been Baked Beans Garage. I am Chinchilla, and I will see you next time.